Okay, hopefully that's given everybody an opportunity to log on to Slido. So now we'll just be thinking about the context of clinical psychology in the UK. So we thought it might be quite helpful just to have a brief introduction of clinical psychology, just because a lot of us might be in different stages of our careers at the moment. So clinical psychologists really work across the lifespan, so working with children and young people all the way to older adults. And we work with a range of different mental health difficulties from, for example, mild to moderate depression to severe enduring difficulties such as personality difficulties or psychosis. And in the UK, we follow a scientist practitioner model. And what that means is not only are we doing clinical work that is informed by psychological research or theory, but also being an active contributor to developing the field of clinical psychology by conducting research that informs practice. Okay. And in the UK, all courses, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, so you have to be trained in at least cognitive behavioral therapy as one of the first primary models. And also another model, for example, that might be systemic family therapy, psychodynamic psychotherapy, or some courses offer cognitive analytical therapy. So for example, CAT for short. I know Exeter, for example, primarily focuses on CAT in addition to CBT. Anything that you wanted to add here, Take?
No, yeah. Yeah, I think you have on the next page.
Oh, brilliant. So yeah, a bit more. So in terms of in the UK, clinical psychologists can work in many different settings, for example, in charity settings or third sector, but typically after training, a lot of people work for the National Health Service, so the NHS in the UK. And really the role of clinical psychologists is incredibly diverse. It's not just limited to providing therapy, but there's also thinking about supervision, teaching, of course, one-to-one therapy, group therapy, advocating for our clients, service users, policy making, and also consultation. And at the moment, in the current context of the NHS, there is a growing emphasis on clinical psychologists to be leaders within the system. Anything that you wanted to add here, Take, meanwhile, I'll let more people in?
Sure. So I guess the point about leaders, I think there's definitely a growing emphasis on that, and I think part of it is also service development, service improvement. So I think what that kind of means is essentially being part of like developing or improving services within the NHS. So I think that's quite a big part of it as well. Yeah, and a lot of, I guess, working with other professionals. So working within multidisciplinary teams is also very common. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Take. That's a really, really good point. And exactly kind of what Take was saying. Here's just a slide to show you the different ways in which clinical psychologists can influence the system. So like Take said, service development, conducting research, management and leading the team, providing supervision. These are all different aspects of being a leader as a clinical psychologist. And I would really encourage you to start thinking about roles that might help you develop leadership skills, or just start thinking about what existing leadership skills you already have that will help you in your journey in clinical psychology. So if anyone is interested, the source for this is Examining Leader Competencies, and it's by the BPS, just the sources down there below. So moving on to thinking about the Doctor in Clinical Psychology in the UK, or DClinPsy, I would highly recommend all of you to bookmark this website called Clearinghouse. So Clearinghouse essentially is a one-stop hub with a lot of helpful information about the DClinPsy courses, entrance criteria, and information on funding, especially for international students. And a lot of the common queries should be answered when you look through the website, but it's also, there's a caveat that certain courses don't go through Clearinghouse. For example, King's College London, so King's has their own application procedure, and you have to go through their website. And also I think Hertfordshire, they go through both Clearinghouse and also their own website. So I would really encourage you to just check the different courses for the requirements. So just a quick summary of the DClinPsy. So the DClinPsy is a 3-year full-time professional training program in the United Kingdom to become a qualified practicing clinical psychologist. And what it really involves is balancing a mixture of clinical placement, research, and also academic components. So what that means is attending lectures, completing coursework for accreditation purposes, and this is across all 3 years. And once you complete the 3 years of training, this leads to a doctoral level qualification and confers eligibility to register and practice as a clinical psychologist in the UK. And in the UK, clinical psychologist is regulated by the Health and Care Professionals Council, so that's HCPC, and also the British Psychological Society, so the BPS. Was there anything that you wanted to add here, Takei?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, also signpost to the alternative handbook, also by the BPS. That's also a very helpful, I guess, resource in just understanding the different courses. So I think within the document, the alternative handbook, they kind of, I guess it's a bit about the experience from trainees that are on the course. So sharing about their experience about the course, placements, research, and I think it also gives a little bit more insight into, I guess, specific modalities that perhaps the course kind of focuses on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Take. I think that, yeah, the alternative handbook is available on the BPS, and it's just a really, really great booklet, I guess, where current trainees really share their experiences, because I think Clearinghouse provides you with all the essential information, but it's more important to hear the experiences of current trainees. That gives you a good idea of what it's really like to train at a particular course. So thinking about specifically for international students, before we talk about that, just to give you an example of what the DClinPsy looks like. So what I put down here is an example of King's DClinPsy. So like I said, for applications, you apply directly via King's College London application portals. Some of you might have already studied at King's before, so this should be quite familiar for you. And in terms of the timetable or teaching, for us, Mondays and Fridays are always our teaching days. And in first year, the teaching schedule is really, really packed. So that's just making sure that we have the right knowledge in order to complete our placements. But in second and third years, there are more space for research or study days. And similarly, in similar vein, Tuesdays and Thursdays are placements days to help us gain clinical competencies. So here's an example of our first year timetable, just a week, just to show you and give you a flavor of what type of lectures we get and, yeah, I guess the intensity of it. Anything that you wanted to add here, Take, at all?
No, I think that's pretty, good. I would just say that I guess across different universities is slightly different. I think many universities in the beginning, they often have you don't start placements, I guess, in the first week in. You usually have like full teaching weeks in the first, I guess, couple of weeks or maybe a month for King's. And I think different universities might have slightly different, I guess, schedules in terms of, I can't remember which uni, but I know some unis during summer when, like for King's, we have Mondays and Fridays as research days. Some universities might have extra placement days. So I think, it kind of depends on the university in terms of how the schedule looks.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Take.
Can I follow up on Take, actually? For example, in Essex, we had Monday and Tuesday as our our teaching days, and Wednesday to Friday were the placement days. And we had a month-long teaching block at the beginning of the first year.
Great, thank you so much, Aisha and Take. So it sounds like there's quite a lot of, I guess, differences between courses. I would really encourage you to speak to current trainees or, again, go onto Clearinghouse, and they should be able to provide you with a lot of information about what teaching looks like. So thinking more specifically about international students, there is a huge misconception in clinical psychology that it is in some ways easier for international students to get on because we are self-funding, but this is absolutely a misconception. And that's the reason why I put in front of you some statistics. And I guess it's just to give you a realistic expectation of the competition for self-funding or international places. So as you can see, the competition is really, really high, and we don't have it easier because we go through the same rigorous application and interview process as NHS or home students. If anything, the competition for places can be higher for some courses. So it's absolutely not an easier alternative than NHS funded places. And it really is a testament to your abilities and your experience. So that's one thing that I really hope you can take away if you do apply and if you do get on. So for example, at King's this year for this entry, we had 142 applications for 3 places. But I guess another point that I wanted to say is that there's some courses that allows home students to apply for self-funding places. So that might include British nationals to apply for self-funding places. And naturally, that means that the competition for places for self-funding places will be even higher. So Hertfordshire University is an example. Again, I would really encourage you to reach out to specific courses if you have any further questions. And also just to note that not all DClinPsy courses actually accept international students. So as you can see here, there's only a limited number of courses that offer self-funding places. And previously, some courses that offered self-funding places have now withdrawn these places. So they're no longer offering training. And some examples might include Royal Holloway. I don't know if Essex provides any more self-funding trainees, Aisha.
I'm not sure, but there is one thing I would like to add. Did you take that from Clearinghouse? Because there are 2 ways to apply. So you can directly apply to the uni, or you can apply through Clearinghouse. And Essex was taking international trainees through their own system, so they might not be included in this, you know, in this statistics. So that might not necessarily mean that only these courses are accepting international students at the moment.
Yeah, that's a really, really helpful reflection, Aisha. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to just take a look at the different university courses just to see whether they are still accepting international students, because I know for sure Royal Holloway now has stopped accepting international students for some reason.
I think they can find that information on Clearinghouse still, but just not in these statistics, because they would only show the statistics for courses who take their international trainees through Clearinghouse, not the other ones. Yeah, they would still find that info on Clearinghouse, not just from here.
Great, thank you so much, Aisha. So thinking a bit about finances now, and I just wanted to preface that it can be really, really challenging with your self-funding because international students are on what we call honorary contracts. And what that means is there's no salary or funding attached to the placements that you complete or work. And on top of that, you also have to pay course fees, and each course will vary. And yeah, again, I would encourage you to check the course websites directly. So before applying, it might be helpful to just have an idea of how you will obtain funding for both the course fees, but also your own living fees in the UK, because I know, for example, when you are completing a visa application, they might ask you to provide proof of your maintenance finance and your ability to finance your studies in the UK. And unfortunately, UK-based scholarships for international students are extremely rare. So majority of students are typically supported by funding from their family, friends, loans, or employers from their home country. But that's not to say there are no scholarships at all. It's just it can be quite competitive and relatively rare. So for international students, main options for scholarships are from large bodies, and these are from 3 different sources. So the first one is funding from your own government's research councils, which again will vary depending on your home country and also availability and scope. And what we mean by scope is whether it will actually, I guess, finance a clinical/research doctorate in comparison to a full research doctorate like a PhD. And there are other organizations such as Full Recognition, Commonwealth Scholarship, Gates Foundations, and the Rhodes Scholarship. So these are the ones that we found. And sometimes they fund students from a particular country or group of countries. And also there are opportunities for scholarships from large UK organizations, and they typically fund really exceptional international students. So what that might look like might involve writing a personal statement for the scholarship and reasons for why they should provide you with scholarship and how you would use them. And that's typically funded by the FCO, so the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. But a major caveat is, again, please do your own research. And these are just examples of possible scholarships, although they will all likely have very specific criteria. So it's worth researching whether you, as the applicant, and also the doctorate in clinical psychology as a course would be eligible for these scholarships. I just wanted to pause here and wondered if anyone had anything to add, either Aisha or Take.
Well, actually, probably just a small point, but I guess when thinking about living costs and maintenance fees, I guess one of the important ones for, I guess, this like phase is also the rising cost of living, because I think especially in the UK, I think that's something that quite a lot of people feel it, and also I guess with course fees as well, they can increase. So yeah, school fees can increase across the years. I think it really depends on, I guess, schools and yeah.
Aisha, I saw you unmute. I didn't know if you wanted to add something.
No, I just wanted to say that even though I'm not sure how many scholarship organizations in the UK would offer scholarships to international students, I think it's quite rare to fund a DClinPsy. I mean, for masters, yes, especially for example, I think Chevening Scholarship does offer some masters funding, but when it comes to doctorate, I think it's quite rare. So I want the applicants to have realistic expectations. I think it's likely for them to secure a scholarship from their own country, which is what I did, because of how clinical psychology works in the UK, I guess.
Thank you so much, Aisha. And yeah, I just wanted to emphasize, please, again, do your own research. I don't want to give you that, I guess, like Aisha said, the expectation that scholarships are easy to come by. They're absolutely relatively rare, especially UK-based, like Aisha said, because of how the NHS works and how clinical psychology training is structured. And there will be more reflections, I'm guessing, from Aisha later on. So that's really, really helpful. So thinking about pre-training experience, I just put a quote here just for you to read. And it's just to help you think about what type of experience would, I guess, put you in good stead for clinical training. And a really helpful question I always ask other people to think about just to orientate themselves is just, why do you want to be a clinical psychologist rather than a therapist? Or why a clinical psychologist rather than a researcher or doing a PhD? I just want you to hold those questions in mind when you are just writing down your application statement, because that really, really helps you think to the core, why is clinical psychology a career that you want to pursue? And I guess of note is that the requirements across universities really, really differ. So for example, some universities might ask for 2 years of full-time clinical experience post-qualification. Some might ask for a minimum of just 6 months. Some don't even specify and just say that as long as you have suitable clinical experience. So the best thing to do is to check Clearinghouse for the details. And what I would do actually is to reach out to the course and ask for clarification if you are in some way unsure whether your experience meets their needs. And when you start putting together your application and reflecting on your experience, it can be helpful to divide them into 3 different sections. So think about clinical, research, and other relevant competencies. And I'm just going to be going through them one by one now, just to give you some examples. So thinking about academic requirement, the essentials are you need an undergraduate degree in psychology at honours levels, or an accredited conversion course or qualifications assessed as giving GBC status. So what that is graduate basis for chartered membership with the BPS. That was a test of my knowledge. And here is a helpful link to give you all the information that you need about converting your home psychology degree and whether that meets the requirement of the BPS GBC status. And really non-essential, and it could be circumstantial, and is MSc, so master's degree. So the reason why I put that is, for example, at UCL, they have a specific requirement for an undergraduate of 67% or above, so a high 2-1. And they would consider applications from individuals who might not have achieved high 2-1 if they had other evidence of academic rigor. So for example, a master's degree. And I guess the rationale for that is because the course is a 3-year doctoral level course, and they need us to show academic competency, but it's not an essential thing that you need to have depending on your circumstances. Sorry, that's the best way I can put it.
Can I just jump in, Jason?
Yeah.
I would like to also underline that most of the courses who accept a master's or a PhD on top of your undergrad degree, if you didn't have the required undergrad marks, they would want you to do a research master's, not a taught master's, which is, I think it's really important, so that people are aware. Not all the courses accept that. Some don't even accept, research masters, but just wanted to, make sure that the attendees are aware of this fact.
Thank you, Aisha. That's really, really helpful. And again, courses might just differ, and as a caveat, we always have to say it's best to check with the individual courses about their most up-to-date requirements. And thinking about clinical experiences, the key points that I wrote down are some helpful points for reflection. So I guess the key points, really thinking about your role, is giving you an understanding of what clinical psychologists do. Supervision by a clinical psychologist or an equivalent mental health practitioner. So for example, a CBT therapist, having direct clinical contact with service users to give you that experience working in mental health, and really have an understanding of how clinical psychologists might fit in within different systems. So that might be within healthcare or within the wider governmental system, just as an example. Again, this is just an overview. Important to look at courses because, again, each course will specify what roles would satisfy the clinical suitability. For example, at King's, because of really high competition for places, it is very unlikely that someone without experience of assessment and intervention will be shortlisted for an interview. And that is just a note that was passed on by our program manager, who will be joining us later. But I guess some example roles, depending on your stage of a career, that could be helpful are assistant psychologist or equivalent mental health professional roles, working within your country's healthcare system, or some people might be already working in the UK. Another helpful, I guess, relatively more entry role to give you experience working in mental health is healthcare assistant, support worker, or care staff roles in mental health care settings. Moving on to thinking about research, again, the key points are listed on the left. Please do take a look as I talk through the examples. So research is a very, very important part of clinical training, and I think a lot of people forget about that we're not only clinical, we work clinically, but also we do research. So you'll be doing doctoral level research, so it'll be really, really useful to have some understanding of the research cycle and also, I guess, gaining experience in conducting research. So some example roles might be research assistant psychologist, which gives you a balanced mix of clinical and research role. That might depend on your healthcare system though. And the research that typically research assistant psychologists might involve audits, service evaluation projects, and sorry, I just saw a comment of I cannot see your screen. Where are the pointers mentioned? So it's just mentioned in the arrow. Can everyone see the arrow? Aisha, can you see the arrow, Takmi?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Don't worry at all if you can't see it. I'll be sending you the PowerPoint later at the end anyway, so not to worry too much. And I guess another example role is research assistant or research therapist on clinical trials. Another point I wanted to add is dissemination. So when people think about dissemination, they automatically associate it with publication. So research publication, papers, etc., which is really, really important. But I would also encourage you to think more broadly about what dissemination means. So disseminating research could be presenting research to your service as an away day, for example, or presenting your research in a conference, presenting your research to important stakeholders. These are all examples of dissemination, and really what it means is just sharing or passing down psychological knowledge or research to different audiences. So really, really helpful to hold that in mind when you reflect on experience of dissemination, because I guess for me, I was really put off by that. I didn't have any papers at the point when I applied, so I was automatically worrying that I wouldn't meet the requirements. But thinking about more broadly dissemination made me reflect a bit more on my other experiences that I could bring into. I'm aware of time, so I'm just going to quickly move on. So another experience, I guess, I would put under is grouped under other. So some key points are that the role of clinical psychologist has really changed over time. So we're no longer just therapists, but also we're expected to be future leaders and managers of services. So it will be really good to show other relevant skills such as project management. So for example, that might be experiences of leading a university society or group, experience in sales or businesses. And the reason why I put that is because actually as leaders, we might be thinking about how we could secure funding for a new service or coming up with a business plan for commissioning a new service. So experience in sales and business are very, very important. And also, I guess, mentoring, because that demonstrates initial skills in supporting another individual's development, which would be helpful when thinking about becoming supervisors and providing supervision. So again, these are just points to reflect on, not necessarily needing to have done all of these roles, but just good to think about for your development as a trainee. So here is a table of my own pre-training experience at the time of application. I'm not going to go through them into too much detail because I'm quite keen to move on to speak with Take and Aisha so they can share their experience. So I'm just going to pause here for a couple more seconds. And what I would encourage you to do, just as a personal tip, when I was writing my personal statement, I divided my experience under that, so that can help me pull everything together in a more coherent narrative when I wrote the application statement. Okay, as I said, you'll be receiving these slides again, so you can take a look in your own time later on. But now I just wanted to invite Take back to the conversation. So PG Cert is postgraduate certificate. Okay, Take.
No. Yes.
Are you here?
Yeah. I just wanted to add one more thing, I guess, before
Sure.
I talk about like my experience and all that. Just thinking about the pre-clinical experience or pre-training experience. I think sometimes it can feel really overwhelming having to fulfill like every like single kind of criteria, clinical research, others. I do want to say that there are people that get on the course without, I guess, having an aspect of it. So a lot of people don't necessarily have all the aspects of like clinical research and others. Like there are people that perhaps primarily have research background or primarily clinical. And I think that's okay. And I think a lot of courses do stress that they will still consider applicants, yeah, even if you don't have like all of them. I would say a very key part of application or perhaps securing a place is also in terms of how you reflect on the experience itself. I think that's really one of the key things that they do look into in terms of what did you learn, how can that be applied, I guess, as a clinician. Yeah, what do you take away from it, and I guess what else do you want to develop when you're on training as well. Yeah, so I just want to, because I think that was one of the things that I felt really overwhelmed when I was applying in terms of, okay, it's so competitive and there's so many things that people have done. So I guess I'd really encourage just to reflect on what experience you already have, because sometimes that is already, I guess, enough to get on. Yeah. So I think just wanted to highlight that. But yeah, so I guess on my own pre-training experience, I did a bachelor's degree. Yeah, and I guess the main role I did was so in Singapore, I worked in Singapore before, I guess, getting on to training, and associate psychologist is kind of like assistant psychologist role there. That was, I guess, mainly the experience I had with other like internship, research, volunteering stuff I kind of did in between and during my undergraduate degree as well. And I guess during training as well. If I'm not wrong, most universities do 6 months placements. So every 6 months you change in terms of placement wise. I know some universities do 1 year long placements as well. So it depends on universities, but yeah, as a first year trainee, so far my experience is in adult placement and child placement. Yeah, so 6 months each for that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Take, for that brief introduction. I guess my next question would be kind of what was your experience of applying to the DClin and also your experience of interviews? If you just give a quick summary of your reflection.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess in terms of application wise, I'd say, yeah, really talking to people, understanding, I guess essentially what Jason was saying, that's pretty much, I guess, what I kind of did. I'd say the first time, so I applied twice for the King's course, specifically, I applied twice. The first time was on the wait list, and then the second time I got on. I'd say the first time I didn't exactly had much, I guess, idea in terms of how interviews would be, how the application process is. I think it was quite, yeah, I want to recognize, I think it's a very overwhelming process. And I think there was a lot of workshops and support out there, but I think it was also a point in time where I didn't want to have that much information at the same time, because I think inevitably you would be comparing and all that. So I kind of felt I wasn't really at that like state, or yeah, it wouldn't be as helpful. I think the second time when I kind of applied and I kind of knew what the process would be, what the interviews would look like, I did reach out to some people on Twitter to reach out, what are kind of, yeah, how might it be helpful in terms of interview process and all that. And I think a lot of people are very supportive, very helpful. So I'd definitely say reach out. And sometimes people are really busy and they really can't support and help, and that's fine, but I think some people would be able to offer some time and support, and so I think that's quite a good way as well, just to connect to people and understand a little bit more about the course.
Thank you, Take. How about your experience of interviews? What was that like for you?
So yeah, I was saying, I guess preparing questions is quite a big one. Reaching out to people, like I was saying, in terms of understanding, I guess, the course. And I'd say I thought a little bit more specifically about why that specific course I wanted to get on and train. And I think, yeah, it really varies. I think different universities have different ethos, different focus in terms of training, research, and everything. So I think it's really in terms of what your interest is and your passion. And I think it does, I would say, come across during the interview. But yeah, I guess during the interview process, yeah, I don't know. I think it will vary depending on which uni you interview. I definitely think King's is quite a straightforward process, relatively short. Yeah, if you kind of experience other university interviews, yeah. So I think King's is quite straightforward. Yeah, the panel is really nice. So, yeah.
Thank you, Take. So it sounds like, I guess, a lot to think about in terms of reflecting on why this particular course and why clinical psychology. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think that's quite important going into interviews, just to have an idea of why this course specifically, because sometimes they do ask why. Okay, and I guess, Take, it might be helpful to also know a bit more about the positives and negatives of being an international trainee.
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, starting with, I guess, positives and or benefits in that sense, I'd definitely say there's a lot of new experience, like in the UK, which probably would be quite different from your home country, just given the fact that it's a different country in itself. Um, so I'm originally from Hong Kong. I spent a lot of time in Singapore. I grew up mainly there. And I'd say because I guess Hong Kong, Singapore is quite a small country. So in terms of, I think one of the things that really appealed to me, like training in the UK, is the, I guess, population, yeah, the spectrum, yeah, different representations in terms of population that you'll be working with. And I think, I guess this is not specific for international trainees, but more also in terms of the doctorate in itself, because I think some countries you do a master's instead of a doctorate level. And I think one of the things that really, I guess, appealed to me was also the research aspect and yeah, having more time to do research, doing a bit more of that, and also more time on placements. I kind of yeah, I think that was definitely a plus for me. And I guess also as an international trainee, you meet people from different, yeah, backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, from different countries. And I think that is, I guess I really benefited from that, and continue to. And I think it's also, I guess, in line with being a psychologist, in terms of understanding people's perspectives and opening, I guess, your perspectives, broadening your perspectives and all that. So I think I really enjoy that aspect of it. I think it does come with challenges, moving countries, you know, being away from family, many of your friends. I would say finances is definitely something that is quite stressful. I think particularly for me, I'm not on a scholarship. So with the rising cost of living and everything, I do think that is quite a big strain. And I think there are some, I guess, cultural differences as well, which yeah, might take, I guess, time and well, it's a kind of like a process, but definitely takes time in terms of how to reflect on it, how to find support, yeah, and how to kind of understand and make sense of everything. Yeah, sorry, just a really, I
Thanks.
guess, overview of it. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Take. Although I'm aware of time, I think you are touching upon a really, really important topic about cultural differences and how we negotiate that as trainees, because sometimes we might find ourselves, I guess, in quite a difficult position. For example, if someone was living in the UK for a while but still is international, it's almost like a third culture kid, and I guess that's quite a difficult experience to navigate in itself. But yeah, how did you navigate those challenges, those cultural differences?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I think that's a really interesting, I guess, question. One that often think about, also because of my background, I kind of moved around a lot. So I think that kind of helped in terms of how, I guess, I've grown up. But I think specifically in the clinical aspect, I definitely saw a lot of cultural differences. I think specifically working with maybe clients as well, certain dynamics in terms of therapeutic alliance, how you relate to, I don't know, supervisors and all that. I think it there can be quite, yeah, some differences in terms of culturally. I'd say speaking to like people from similar backgrounds. So within Kings, we have a reflective practice for people, uh, well, yeah, from ethnic minorities, but I think also wider network in terms of other reflective practices. I think that's quite a good way in terms of like just talking through things, processing and understanding what people think as well. I'd also say like supervision is really helpful. um, I think different courses you have support from different people. So for Kings, we have clinical tutors, we have personal support tutors, and I think these are, I guess, all really helpful platforms to kind of get support, and yeah, talk things through. And definitely, I think your peers as well, peers and friends, I'd say, is very helpful in terms of yeah, sharing these reflections and learning and negotiating some of these? I think it's quite a, I guess, broad question to answer. I think there's a lot of nuances in terms of what specific things might be helpful, and I think that's also quite different for different people. So yeah, I'm aware
Yeah.
I'm just kind of touching and going on certain things. Yeah.
I mean, I gave you an impossible job, Take, to talk about cultural differences in 2 minutes. So thank you for those honest reflections. And just a quick note, if you have any questions, please do pop them onto Slido, and the most upvoted ones or relevant ones would be answered, I guess. And really, we're moving on to now Aisha. I'm just going to pause recording now.
Student and child treatment, that's part of the process of having international trainees as well. So Aisha, you know, kind of coming in from Turkey, kind of doing all her training here and stuff and working here, but then also then taking back her expertise and knowledge and skills back to Turkey, and that's a wonderful thing. So it's kind of that two-way thing of everybody benefiting from this process, which is why at King's we're super kind of keen to encourage applications from trainees. I guess just personally, something that I've noticed is that I guess a lot of international trainees are not familiar with the structure of the NHS, the kind of, you know, all the cultural things that you guys mentioned and touched upon as well, which is why I guess I'm in post. So you can send through emails to the general kind of inquiry email to Mark, and then Mark and I can both kind of have a look at that and support potential applicants as well. So yeah, I guess those are the kind of the main points that I wanted to kind of flag.
That's great. Really, really thank you, Mayanthi, for that. That's so helpful. And I guess that naturally brings us to the Q&A, I guess. And like Mayanthi said, should be able to support us from a course perspective as well. But first of all, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. And also a big thank you to all our speakers who joined us in our workshop today. Really, really appreciate taking the time out of your busy day to facilitate this workshop. So yeah, moving on to Q&A. If you haven't already, please go onto Slido and post your questions there, or upvote the questions that are most relevant to you and you like answered. I think Rachel also put the link on the chat. Yeah. Okay. Rachel, are you on the call?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Rachel. Lovely to have you. So Rachel's also one of the trainees, and she's a second-year trainee at King's, and she'll be joining us with a Q&A. I was just wondering, can you see the Slido as well?
Not right now.
That's okay.
I'll open it on my phone. Okay.
No worries at all. I just lost the link just now. Okay, don't worry, I've got it. So, the first question that got 9 thumbs up, what can international students do to boost their chances of selection given the very small number of places available to them outside their home country?
I think that's a really good question. And I think, you know, a lot of us always wonder, you know, why us and not other people? I think I would say everything that's been mentioned so far, trying to probably get as many opportunities in all of those areas that were discussed. I would say kind of the clinical, the research, try to get involved with other things that might give you some kind of leadership competencies, and not just focus maybe on one area, or if you just focus on, you know, the clinical, that's fine, but try to get, you know, some of the competencies that the courses are looking for, whether it's assessment or brief interventions, if you can. Yeah, that's what I think. Mark might be able
so much,
to answer that question.
Yeah, I was about to say Mayanthi and Mark, how about from a course perspective?
Maybe on our entry criteria?
The question was, what can international students do to boost their chances of selection given the very small number of places available to them outside their home country?
I suppose that thinking of us from the course, which is that we have, every course is going to have a large amount of people applying for the course. One of the key secrets is, not secrets, but also that one of the key things is that it's all people who apply should read their entry criteria first, because probably about 10% of every year for home and international students, a lot of them don't meet our minimum criteria. For international students, this would be GBC status, having the required minimum degree grade, and then that's before you start shortlisting based on the experience that you have. So that's the first step of that one. We do appreciate also that every country, particularly when you're from, if you gain your experience there, is going to be different. So some people may not have the opportunities, and some that would replicate, for say, home students that apply to us in the NHS. You don't have to have experience in the NHS, but we do suggest that you have some experience of, say, delivering assessments, interventions, or other therapeutic experience, because a lot of the other people applying do have this. And so there is, if you see our website and you see our guidance, that are what we consider minimum requirements for relevant experience. However, that if you don't have the experience in intervention or everything else in that one, the likelihood is that you probably won't be successful in being shortlisted, because a lot of the other candidates will have that. So just to keep that in mind. So there's another thing with some countries, which is you don't have to have loads of different roles, but we're looking at the quality of the experience that you have. So for example, that if your experience, you meet our 6-month criteria, which might go up to 12 months, but that's not finalized yet, is that if your experience is made up, for example, of 6 1-month internships, that's not going to be the same quality of experience as someone who stayed within a role for 6 months and developed in that way. So just thinking about it in that sort of way. The other thing is to note that you don't need to have a distinction or PhD to get onto us. We do look at all areas of academic achievement. But just to sort of note that, say, if you do less well, I suppose, in one area, then it may be useful to do another qualification or something just to improve your chances of that side of your application process. And research experience, we don't have a specific, where we can't quantify research experience, but we do suggest that all applicants should have some research experience post-undergrad. So this might be, say, that you might work in a publication, you might do audit in a service, or you work, for example, as a helping a PhD student elsewhere on that side. Doesn't mean that you don't have to do a formal research assistant role, but it's also good because we are doctoral degree to have a bit more experience on that side. But it doesn't have to be an MSc or PhD.
Thanks so much, Mark. I was just wondering, Mayanti, did you have anything else that you wanted to add from your perspective as a clinical tutor?
I mean, Mark just covered all the kind of the important bases. I think what I would just like to reiterate is that the reason we have these criteria is that, you know, this is a doctoral level degree, so we want people to actually be in a position where they're ready to take on the clinical side of things and the research side of things. So having that depth and having that kind of ability to kind of demonstrate their ability to do both research and clinical work is kind of what we're looking for. So it's not a sort of, we're trying to stop people from getting on the training. It's just about knowing when people are prepared and ready to embark on this journey, because yeah, it's not an easy one. Just to make that clear.
Yeah.
And that's my 2 cents.
Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I suppose
Mark,
echoing my auntie, it's one, applying when you think you're ready for training. It's the course has a 3-week induction period for teaching before students go on placement. We're not expecting you to hit the ground running and deliver therapy alone with no supervision, which you probably still wouldn't get after you qualify. But we do expect you to be comfortable in sitting with a room with a client on your own with supervision for places in the thing. So if you have no clinical experience, the likelihood is you're not going to be ready for it. And this would also come across in your application and interview if you got to that stage. And so this is why we say there must be some clinical experience. You can get that experience in a research capacity. However, this could be, say, for example, delivering 6-week an intervention over 6 weeks in a research capacity and seeing large amounts of clients. But if your only experience is research, for example, and all you're doing is looking at a large data set, that is not going to count for a relevant experience.
Thank you so much, Mayanti and Mark. Very, very helpful questions. Answers. Mark brain. We're not going to be taking any questions from the call directly, so please do post on Slido. I guess the next set of questions are all related to a lot of visas and funding, and I guess funding we spoke a bit more about in the presentation. I'll be sending all of you the slides again, so please do take a look at the funding section later. But also, I guess visas, it's a really tricky question because we have no control, or the course anyway, the course has no control over NHS funding or Home Office visa restrictions, etc., etc. I can only speak from my personal experience from applying, so hopefully that might be helpful. And I'm sure Rachel and Taki could also share experiences. From the courses that I applied to, none of them would take any visas, such as postgraduate visas or I don't know, any temporary visas that is available in the UK. Again, I would really encourage you to take a look at the clearinghouse, because some courses might vary, but I can only speak from experience. Mark has raised his hand. Yes, Mark, can come rescue.
Would this be in relation to visas for the NHS funded places?
Yeah.
So I suppose just to clarify, I suppose that there's a misunderstanding, I think, as to what the NHS funded places are for. Students aren't specifically paid to undertake placements. They're not specifically paid to attend the teaching. They are employed as part of NHS workforce planning. So they get a place in the course, and then the NHS funds this as part of their 10-year forward view or 5-year forward view. It keeps changing to increase capacity of the NHS workforce. To meet the requirements for these places, one is you must have home fee status. So therefore, if you say on a student visa, everything else, you don't have home fee status, you have to meet particular criteria, and the UK CSA is best for that. Also, just to note, if there's anyone from Hong Kong here, that if you're on a B&O visa, you still need to meet a 3-year residency requirement before even being considered for that. Once you get the place, you get a 3-year training contract, which may be extended. The regulation from NHS England, who used to be Health Education England, is to be eligible for this contract, you need to have the right to work without restriction for the full 3 years of the training course. So if you're on a student visa, you're restricted to 20 hours per week. That does not count for the bit on that side. So that's where it comes from. So if you have international fee status, you will become an international fees place. And I appreciate that many of you might want to go and work in the NHS afterward, but you might understand that because the NHS are trying to build their workforce in the long term, they might reserve this for more people with home fee status who they think might stay in the UK for a long time as a result. It doesn't always happen, but this is why.
Thank you so much, Mark. Just realized I was on mute. How about Rachel and Take? I guess from your experience of applying, was there any other reflections you wanted to share? Yeah. Mark, full marks on the answer. The next question that's most thumbs up was, can I practice in foreign countries with the UK degree? If so, could you mention some countries practicing licenses that might be most compatible with the UK? Sorry, I guess whoever wrote that question, does that mean, are you asking this, did DClinPsy transfer to other countries, or are you thinking of, I guess, training from a different country and coming to practice in the UK? If you're here, please do type in your chat. But if not, I'll take it as the first one. Can you practice in overseas? Any experiences there? I guess Aisha helpfully shared that her training was convertible to when she was practicing in Turkey. But yeah, anyone else?
I think I can.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh. You guys go ahead. You guys go ahead.
Everyone's jumping in.
No, I just wanted to say, for European countries, so for example, from France, some of my experiences are in France, it would be quite easily kind of transferable. But I know that for other countries, some of my experiences were in the UAE, so the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai more specifically, you would need to have worked for 2 years before being eligible to work in the UAE, for example. So I think it varies a lot on the countries, but I think it's quite transferable. But it just depends on, whether you need to have a certain number of experience after training.
Yeah, I'd say for Singapore as well, it's quite transferable. I don't think you need any other training, training supervision or anything. I think it's quite transferable in Singapore. I'm not so sure if you know, Jason, but I guess in Hong Kong, I think it is also relatively quite transferable. Yeah, I'd say the main thing is whether or not you can speak Cantonese, because I'd say in Hong Kong, if you want to work in a public healthcare system, that would be primarily in Cantonese when you work with clients.
Mark?
Mark, do you want to go?
I asked if you missed me. It's great. So we've been taking international students from, I think, 2011. And we also have a number of our home students obviously go on to practice elsewhere in the world, Europe and elsewhere. We have not had a problem with any of our students being licensed to practice in their home country, although just to note, there's some countries that didn't have licensing in the first place. But the main thing is for our course that you would be accredited to practice as a clinical psychologist in the UK. Then you could use this to apply for accreditation in your home country if they do have that. We have a template transcript that we've developed for all of our students that's been used for accreditation all across the world. And it hasn't been an issue, but obviously you need to keep a good record of your experiences on the course, which we do have an electronic portfolio for, which students can use in that state. And most of the time, it's never been an issue from my side. Just to note, there are some areas that it may not be just the DClinPsy. So, for example, in some states in the US, if you didn't do a psychology undergraduate degree, for example, that didn't teach the history of clinical psychology, which we now teach as part of our course, just to make sure you get this, is that you might have to do some top-up modules, I suppose, to get this before they credit you. And say Germany and the USA in particular, they're a bit more varied by state accreditation rather than an entire country.
Thank you, Mark. And Mayanti?
Just to add to that, also just to clarify, Rachel, the UAE does not require 2 years anymore, certainly not in Abu Dhabi. That regulation has been taken away. But I guess my only thing would be is check the Department of Health regulations in whichever country that you're looking to work in, because they will change over time. And they will all have specific requirements that will differ from one from the other. So just make sure that you meet all the criteria for the licensing in whatever country that you're thinking of moving to or coming from. And also check insurance as well, because some countries will require you to be registered with a hospital rather than practicing alone, whereas other countries, you'd be perfectly fine to do that. I'm personally aware that it's very easy to transfer things in places like, across Europe, Australia. The US, it changes by state. So I think New York is probably the easiest, but you still have to do licensing exams and things. So yeah, just my guidance would just be double check the Department of Health regulations for that country, but also for that particular state or city, especially in places like the US or even the UAE. So Dubai regulations are completely different from Abu Dhabi regulations because they have 2 different Department of Health that oversee licensing. So just do your homework and check regulations.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing those really, really helpful experiences and tips. I'm going to just try and power through some questions in one answer. Are there any support with writing DClinPsy applications? Yes, absolutely. Also watch this Increasing Access Community Aspiring Psychologist stream, because we also do workshops for applications and interviews. So we will send you updates of upcoming events. So please do subscribe to the mailing list if you haven't already. And also, are all courses CBT? I thought I could answer that question, but now I don't think I can. I think from my understanding is all courses fundamentally has to have provided training on CBT as the core modality. Is that right, everybody? No.
It used to be. Well, I think it was for.
Oh, no.
It is at the moment. Well, technically it is under the regulation for the HEPC and the British Psychological Society, but they are changing that. So each course has to have basically 2 main therapy modalities. We are, as a course, I think our main is CBT, the second is systemic, but we also have skills in other ones like neuro and elsewhere. But some courses might focus more on, say, community psychology or systemic as their primary one. But I think a lot of it started as CBT as the main one, but obviously with a lot of the discussions around CBT and how applicable it is, that some courses are going into, say, more psychodynamic or other ones in that way. But we are, the IPPN, I suppose, is CBT as our main strength.
Thank you so much, Mark. A lot of the other questions are about sponsored visas. Again, just encourage you to please take a look at the courses specifically and also the government websites for visas. In terms of, are we allowed to work up to 20 hours whilst on training? On the student visa, technically you're allowed to work up to 20 hours, but the question is whether it's realistic and I guess, whether it's going to be helpful to work on top of the doctorate. I was just wondering, did anyone else want to share the experience if they worked on top of the doctorate at all, or from a course perspective?
I'd say it's 20 hours normal week and I think it's out of term time, then you can do more. The only issue is that we are a full-time course and it's pretty much full-time. So it can be quite difficult, but we do understand the reasons as to why international students might need to particularly work alongside. So I know that some people have done it before, but we also recommend, because the program is very full on, and then we do recommend it to have a break because it can be quite difficult, I suppose, to manage both at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. And I guess final question, because I'm aware of time. I think this might be more directed towards Mayanti and Mark. So thinking about, is the DClinPsy the only way to continue and grow in doing therapy? Is it compulsory in order to do DClinPsy to grow in the field? How is the long-term growth in clinical psychology? Like, is it slow to rise in the field? And what is the growth like after doing the DClinPsy? I guess that might be quite helpful. A lot of questions, I know, Mayanti from qualified perspective, but also Mark kind of supporting a lot of people through.
So I could
go for it, Mark, because that's a big question.
So I suppose that if you're interested in a career in mental health in particular, is that you don't have to do the DClinPsy. There are many different roles, particularly in the UK, but also in different countries. So obviously there's PWP, there's education mental health practitioners, there's many different ones. So the link that I put in about, in response to the question about psychological professions training, there's lots of different ones such as that. So the DClinPsy is only in the UK particularly, is that you have to do that if you want to practice as an accredited clinical psychologist. So after that, you can apply to join the HCPCs because it's a protected title. But if you do want to help people and you do want to work in mental health, it's not the only way that you can reach that goal. So just note on that. In relation to expansion of places, I suppose for us is that in the UK, after a long time, the government recognised there's a need to invest more in places for training for mental health. So I think the number of commission places that we've had in the past few years has doubled basically in the past 3 years, and it's likely to continue that way for a while. If you look at the NHS Forward View for the next 10 years, which they recently published, they're not going to reduce those training places. They're going to be a small increase, I think, in 2029. So there's a lot more investment in it. And there's actually quite a lot of unfulfilled vacancies, I suppose, within our trust at the moment. So there are those things along, and in different trusts around, there are also different places going on. So there will be the capacity and investment in the long term, basically, to support, particularly post-COVID. There is that recognition of that need. So I don't think there's going to be an issue getting jobs. Many of our international students also have got into jobs in NHS in the UK after they graduated. And then some, after 2 years, they may have returned to their home country after consolidating their skills, but some have also continued to stay and be sponsored in the long term. So
Thank you, Mark. And how about Mayanti?
I mean, again, Mark's covered everything. I mean, the short answer is no. Clinical psychology is not the only route if you want to be in mental health or kind of supporting people. There's so many different options and choices. So yeah, I would say look out for kind of counselling or psychodynamic kind of therapeutic approaches. As Mark said, the PWP, the low intensity stuff. There's a huge range of mental health professionals. Clinical psychology is not the only one.
Yep.
Mark?
I suppose just thinking about this, because I'm just thinking about if you do say the PWP training or the rest, is so obviously the NHS brought in this rule that if you've done a funded programme, you can't then apply. Well, this is for more for home students, I suppose, but also you might apply to this in the future. Is that for home students, they need to stay within that role for at least 2 years from the exam board before applying for another NHS funded course. What we would not encourage is for people to think of those roles alone as a way to step into the DClinPsy. They're a profession in their own right, and they will help people and they do that sort of stuff. Some people do them, they get onto the DClinPsy in the future, but it should not be considered as a way just to say, I got this experience, do that training course and go straight onto the DClinPsy, because you are taking those roles away from other people that would be doing that as a future career. And there's actually a lot of development you can do in those roles to get to higher bands in the NHS and elsewhere.
Thanks so much, Mark. And Mayanti, I was trying to find the unmute button. I guess also caveat, I'm aware that I did PWP training myself, but I know there's a lot of questions around international funding and stuff like that. Again, please do email those courses directly, because some international students would be able to train, but that really depends on the visa that they already have. For example, if someone had a spouse visa, that would give them right to work, and some courses would accept that as training for P2P. So again, we can't cover the remit of P2P here, but please do your own research. But I guess this brings us to the end of the workshop today. I just really wanted to thank Take, Rachel, and also Mayanthi for really, I guess, sharing all your experiences was so helpful, but also really just taking the time out of your really busy day, especially Mayanthi. I know you're incredibly busy. So thank you so much all. And for everyone else, thank you for joining us. And I've put the link for the mailing list. Just complete that, I'll add you to the mailing list, and I'll also circulate the PowerPoint and recording as well. But yeah, otherwise, take care and hope that your career will be successful moving forward. All right, bye everybody. Thanks, bye-bye.